Welcome, folks. This is John Rust on The John Rust Show here on Freedom 95, broadcasting all across central Indiana, Freedom 95. So welcome to the show. Today in the studio with Aiden Marietta and Justin George. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great to be here.
It is Memorial Day weekend. This weekend, we honor those who made the ultimate sacrifice for our freedoms.
And to all those who paid that price and those who are now serving, on behalf of a grateful nation, thank you.
Yes, amen.
And I'll second that, and just to take the time to reflect on those who paid the ultimate sacrifice for our country and
Paid for in blood.
yes.
So absolutely.
And for all those listening, I guess, in here, I would ask that we, a moment of out of respect, a moment of silence for those fallen warriors.
Yes, absolutely.
Amen. Thank you.
Yep. So, folks, this has been a depressing week for me this past week because of the big, beautiful boondoggle is what I call it.
I call it a less friendly version, but I won't say it.
Well,
I won't say it either.
A country ran by banks will always be in debt. Healthcare ran by big pharma will never cure disease. It's pure and simple. Unfortunately, in the United States today and here in Indiana, we are exactly that. And unfortunately, the Republicans, who are conservative in name only in Washington, D.C., except for Thomas Massie and one other congressman,
Congressman Warren Davidson of Ohio.
we have just had a massive, massive government spending bill that massively increases government debt. The Republican Congress is stealing cash from future generations, which is creating an inflation crisis for everyone. You know, the Democrats got a Democrat spending bill without a single Democrat vote. So, folks, listen to this. We all talk about inflation. This is McDonald's price increases from 2019 to 2024. A medium French fry went from $1.79 to $4.19. A Big Mac from $3.99 to $7.49. Just a regular cheeseburger went from $1 on the value meal, which I used to get lots of those. Actually, it was a double cheeseburger, I believe.
Those are the best.
They're $3.15 now for a single cheeseburger. It is inflation. That's not McDonald's price gouging. That's just the reality that our currency today is not worth what it was just a few short years ago, back in 2019, before COVID. Government spending blew through any reasonable expectation of fiscal responsibility. And the Republicans' response is, oh, let's spend more. Let's add more debt.
Kick the can down the road.
And it's kicking it much worse. It has gotten so bad that Congress just this week is passing legislation to stop the production of U.S. pennies because, guess what? Pennies haven't been made from copper in decades. So it's not the copper prices. It is because the labor and just everything that goes into making a penny, they're now 4 cents each. So the government is producing a 1 cent face value coin for 4 cents. That is not reasonable, folks, but that's where we're at.
And we can trace this back to the Big Spending CARES Act from 2020. That was one of the big factors.
Representative Massey, he was the only one on March 27th.
Well, and that's why I'm sad this week, because it's been a once in a generation opportunity. The GOP has the House, the Senate, and the presidency. We have a strong majority in the U.S. Senate. We have enough votes to overcome Lisa Murkowski and Susan Collins on anything with the other quote-unquote conservatives, but they're not. But look at what we're facing. It is just more national government debt. And, you know, the Republican Congress, did you know that Congress has only worked 8 days since April 10th? That's from Wendy Patterson on Twitter. She pointed that out. If you look at their calendar, they're almost always off. You know, sometimes they'll work 4 days a week, but it's usually just 3. And oftentimes they'll take weeks off at a time. Where has the Republican Congress been? They have done nothing. They've only passed, 5 bills for President Trump to sign so far?
5 or less, I'll put it that way.
And what they do pass is just massive Democrat-inspired, Biden-inspired government spending. For the Green New Deal scam, it's just more and more.
Which is funny because they went off saying, "Oh, we're up against Biden," and yet they seem to take inspiration from him.
Yeah.
Well, you know, they just keep
time.
all they, you know, the week before last, they canceled all the Friday votes and just went home and took another 4-day weekend.
Yeah.
You know, go have a martini over lunch with their lobbyists who are paying for their campaigns. You know, the banks that are paying for the banks for Senator Bank. It is.
I see what you did there.
Yeah, it's all just a scam. It's all just, you know, the Republican Congress has been completely useless. And you know what the Republican Congress Twitter account had the audacity to tweet out?
I'm almost afraid to ask.
It says, "We need to get Americans off the sidelines, period."
We need to get Congress off the sidelines.
After they only show up for work 8 days since April 8th. And they're saying Americans get back to work and they don't even show up for the job.
Kind of reminds me of when, in the 1970s, Jimmy Carter tried to do the Malay speech to say "live with less." That didn't go over well.
Well, that's what we have. We have the Malays Republican Congress. That's exactly what they are.
And just check the calendar, too, because Aiden, I showed you the calendar, and then the next day you said, wait a minute, it changed. Remember that? It's a change. They changed it on a whim.
Yeah.
Well,
They just went home.
Yeah. Wouldn't that be nice, folks? Justin Amash. There are two parties in Washington that love central planning and reject liberty.
Yes.
They have superficially different agendas, catering to different constituencies, but it boils down to the same thing. They think they know better than you how to live your life. And they both like government spending, and they both love massive government debt. Unfortunately, the Republican Congress, it's even more than what Obama did, way more.
Exactly. And if you think that's great, that's more, I can find on Senator Banks' official Senate office website, Carmel faces high fire truck costs, delays. Elizabeth Warren and Jim Banks are partnering to help. So partnering with one of the most left-wing senators from Massachusetts. Massachusetts liberalism right there, ladies and gentlemen.
And I would just go on to say, as young conservatives, Aiden and I were saying, Senator Banks, why? Well, we know why. It's because you don't represent us. You represent yourself and your special interests.
Well, he loves the Washington swamp. You know, he doesn't live in Indiana. You know, so Justin Amash again, he says, Washington has two parties that embrace big government and misguided collectivist schemes. If they get their way, Republicans and Democrats in D.C. will turn the United States into Europe. Americans need an alternative fully committed to individual liberty and economic prosperity. You know, that's exactly it. You know, Daniel Horowitz says basically the same thing. So basically the entire GOP agenda now revolves around subsidizing blue state high taxes and Medicaid scams while offering no relief for people getting crushed by the cost of health care who don't want a handout, but just the ability to shop and choose in a fair and open market.
So I guess I'm going to bail out Illinois. Yeah, I'm not paying for that. No thanks.
Thanks to our Republican Congress, we will be.
Yeah, I'm not. Yeah, it's just putting more money in Pritzker's pocket. And by the way, he's got plenty of money. He inherited all of it.
Well, and Daniel Horowitz, he said this: there's not a single conservative. I'll put the word. He didn't say conservative. But I'll say there is not a single conservative transformational policy contained in what is billed as the most consequential bill following the greatest political mandate in a generation. They have squandered that mandate only for massive new government debt, pure and simple. You know, the House GOP, they're raising the debt ceiling now by $4 trillion.
Yay, more debt, right?
Yay!
Let's just bankrupt the country.
But Thomas Massey says it's going to be $20 trillion. You know,
and
James.
Thank you, Congressman Massey, for being a principled conservative and calling this for what it is, by the way.
Well, you know, James Woods, if you don't follow him on Twitter, you should. He's really spot on. He says this: the true enemy of America is the Republican Party, surprisingly. The Democrats will always complain, grift, cheat, and gleefully ignore the law. Who will stop them? In a real two-party system, it would be the Republicans. But they are weak, milquetoast losers who do nothing but talk. All we get...
Spineless.
Sounds about right.
Majority Leader Thune and Speaker Johnson are reportedly pushing back on Trump's executive order on prescription drug prices. Can you believe that? Since 1997, Senator Majority Leader Thune has received over $1.2 million, and since just 2018, he has received over $300,000 from the pharmaceutical companies. So, of course, there's going to be pushback on what Trump's trying to do for drug prices in the United States.
Yes.
It's what Thomas Massey says. Spending is the problem for 2 decades.
And it is the problem, just like what Reagan said. Government is not the solution. Government is the problem.
Yes. So when we come back, folks, we're going to get right back into this. This is John Rust on The John Rust Show. Welcome back, folks. This is John Rust on The John Rust Show, broadcasting on Freedom 95, 950 AM and 95.9 FM all across central Indiana. Memorial Day weekend. It is the weekend where we greatly honor those who sacrificed their lives for our freedoms.
Yes.
Very
Yes.
important. So back to the news, folks. Unfortunately, we only have Thomas Massey to hold up as our Statue of Liberty, raising the torch, saying, hey, this is what's really going on in Washington. He says, and this is clear to any conservative, spending is the problem. This is from Thomas Massey. For 2 decades, federal spending averaged 20% of the GDP. That's the gross domestic product. During COVID, it jumped to 30%. It is currently at 23%. There is a 3% cut there that is free and easy, and the Republicans are refusing to do it. They are continuing to spend at post-COVID levels like we are still fighting COVID, and we're not. If we cut taxes without cutting spending, an even greater fraction of American productivity will be consumed by interest on the debt.
Yeah, they told us they were, and then of course, let's remember, they were the ones also who told us wear a mask and socially distance and stay in your house. We're going to lock you up.
6 feet.
6 feet. Oh.
And now you just get more debt on it.
Oh, here's a Class B misdemeanor if you don't wear a mask. Thankfully, thank God the sheriff stood up.
Yep.
Because, yeah.
So, well, Rand Paul, he says they're scared to cut $9 billion. That's a rounding error in a $2.2 trillion deficit for this year.
Yeah.
If you can't even vote to defund sex change surgeries in Guatemala or trans comic books abroad, you're not a fiscal conservative. You're a fraud.
Yeah.
That's so conservative not to defund that, right?
And so Rand Paul says, send the bill. Let's see who folds. Let's see how the votes are.
Yeah. I already know I know some people are going to vote.
Yeah,
I can
look
just
at the
name-
record.
I could look. Jim Banks. He's going to vote to keep funding that stuff as he has had done for quite some time.
But then he'll tell us how conservative he is.
Well-
and he doesn't show up here in person. He sends others to do his talking.
Well,
Yeah.
and he only works 2.5 days a week.
Yeah.
On weeks they show up at
Yeah.
all. This is from Daniel Horowitz. A sane party would pass 2 reconciliation bills. Take the pressure off and just pass immigration funding offset with the repeal of the Green New Deal. Pure and simple. And save the other stuff for later. Why is that so hard? Well, they don't want to do that, folks, because they want to keep spending at the Biden levels. They love spending money. That's what all these congressmen and senators...
Spend.
It's nothing but massive government debt, and that's what's causing this inflation. That's why a penny costs 4 cents to make today. That's why a cheeseburger at McDonald's that used to be $1 is $3.19 today.
Yeah.
It's because our dollar is worth less and less the more and more our Republican Senate and House spend and spend. It is just awful what happened this past week. You know, one of the congressmen who voted against it, other than
Thomas Massey and Warren Davidson.
Warren Davidson. And thank you both for voting against that. That was a principled vote right there.
Right. So the other congressman who voted against it was Warren Davidson, along with Thomas Massey. He represents Ohio's 8th congressional district.
The same district that John Boehner once represented.
He is a true conservative.
Yes.
There are only 2. There were 2 others in the House, but unfortunately, one allegedly fell asleep, and one stuck his voting card in the voting slot too late after the vote, kind of like Jim Banks did in 2023 on the CR back then.
And you can easily look that up. What Jim Banks did back when he was in the House.
It's like he's the White Rabbit. I'm late.
Well,
He's not just in time.
Nope.
that's how you avoid responsibility. And so he could still claim at the time, well, I'm a conservative. I would have voted against it. Remember, he said
Sure,
that.
pal.
Let's see if he votes for this massive $20 trillion in new projected government debt for the next 10 years. I wouldn't hold your breath.
Spoiler alert, guys. He will.
Yeah, he will, but then he'll tell us how conservative he is, and then it's just par for the course. Oh, I'm a conservative. Yeah, but you vote for the debt, you vote for all this other stuff. That's not conservative.
Well, this is from Representative Ralph Norman. Delaying work requirements for able-bodied adults on Medicaid to 2019 isn't progress. It's fiscally irresponsible and another sad excuse for the swamp. Pure and simple.
Yeah.
You know, Daniel Horowitz, again, major red flag. Not only does the Ways and Means draft that we were talking about on this bill not repeal carbon capture grift credits, unlike others that are going to be repealed in 2031, and he says, quote unquote, yeah, right.
Yeah.
But the Energy and Commerce Committee appears to be blocking states and localities, such as South Carolina has done, from regulating carbon capture pipelines. What that means is the federal government is forcing carbon capture pipelines on property owners in every state. You're not going to be able to say no. And that is just total hogwash. There is absolutely zero, zip, nada need for a carbon capture pipeline. There's nothing wrong with carbon, folks.
It's good.
It's good.
We need it.
The trees love it. Let's
Protect our trees.
Chick-fil-A says eat more chicken. The trees say eat more carbon.
There you go. That's exactly right.
Well, and this is Speaker John Hanson of the South Dakota State Legislature. He says a House Energy and Commerce proposal for the budget reconciliation bill would override state laws that protect landowners' private property rights from being taken by Green New Deal carbon sequestration pipeline companies. You know, that's taking people's private property for this Green New Deal scam.
And that's in South Dakota. It's a
So-called red state.
well, yeah.
But we're being forced on all this carbon crap by the GOP,
Yeah.
not by Biden.
No, Biden's out. But no, Biden didn't even know he was the president. He didn't even know what was going on.
Exactly.
But these guys do.
They
They
be
talk
like him.
about the auto pen being who it really was running the presidency. The Republican Congress and Senate has been the auto pen for Joe Biden.
Yeah.
They have
While doing
rubber
like these-
stamped Biden's policies.
And the auto pen continues.
And
That's
I-
what they're doing.
And they did like these whole like, well, we're gonna investigate them.
From Representative Andy Ogles. He says,
Oh no.
the current reconciliation package codifies Obamacare expansions that funnel money to illegal aliens. I'm not an Obamacare Republican. We either rip out the waste, fraud, and abuse, or we pass a bad bill.
I would just point out Congressman Ogles voted for that bill. So
He did.
Well, and they all do it,
yeah.
except for Thomas Massey.
The one time they're actually paying attention, unlike falling asleep or not doing their voting cards.
Oh yeah, I would just point out Debbie Dingle fell asleep. Remember, her husband was there for 500 years. John Dingle, poster child for term limits, and then she gets caught
Sleeping.
Yeah.
Oh, that sums up Senate Republicans. They're all sitting there asleep in their chairs in Washington. The GOP and the Democrat Party in D.C., it's a double-headed snake, but it's the same snake.
George Carlin said it best. It's a big club and you ain't in it.
Amy Comey Barrett was in the news again this week. She sides with liberals and blocks President Trump from deporting Venezuelans under the Alien Enemies Act of 1798. It's unreal. You know, and she was pushed on Trump by Jim Banks and Todd Young.
Yeah. Because she was a Notre
conservative.
Dame professor, I would imagine. That's why.
You know, our senators Tweedledum and Tweedledee. They're
That's
two
that's
peas
a
in a
good
pod.
description.
Yes.
You know, you can't be a conservative and vote for a 20 trillion. You can't be for a $1 trillion debt increase, let alone a 20.
You should be for no increase in debt.
I mean, that is just like Dylan Mulvaney, who's that drag queen, pushing Bud Light beer, pretending to be a woman. That is Jim Banks and Todd Young in a nutshell.
Yes.
They are both drag queens pretending to be something they're not. They are both pretending to be conservative just like Dylan's pretending to be a woman.
And
He's not.
Oh, and by the way, they said don't boycott Anheuser-Busch because they support us. Yeah, that just like when they were serving Bud Light at Jim Banks' coronation.
His coronation ceremony.
With his pal Eric Holcomb there, too. Praising him to high heaven.
Oh, we're out of time. We'll get back to this after the break, folks. This is John Rust on The John Rust Show on Freedom 95, 950 AM and 95.9 FM all across central Indiana. Welcome back, folks. This is John Rust, your friend and farmer from Seymour, Indiana, on The John Rust Show. Here broadcasting on Freedom 95 on 950 AM and 95.9 FM all across central Indiana. Here in the studio with Aidan Marietta and Justin George. Welcome back, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So we're talking about this massive, big, beautiful boondoggle. Daniel Horowitz had this to say about it. The fact that we can't even get a clean repeal of the Green New Deal scam when it passed through this very process in the first place should tell you everything you need to know about today's GOP, our grand old party. It's the grand old party of the Green New Deal scam. Yeah, they cut, I think, half of it out, but they need to take it out from the root. They need to pull it out from the root. Every penny should be repealed from it, and they have not. They have just kicked the can down the road because I think a lot of Republicans are banking on Democrats retaking the House in a year and a half.
Yeah, given Hakeem Jeffries the real gavel. He has the de facto gavel.
Yeah.
So then the Republican pretend conservatives can then go back to being pretend conservatives where their votes are meaningless.
Yes.
Their votes are meaningful today, folks.
It's just like with Mitch McConnell. He loves being in the minority. John Thune would love to. And Mike
Well,
Johnson
Jim
wants
Banks
to be
too.
minority leader.
Yeah, Jim Banks.
They want to be in the minority so they can claim to be conservative and thump their chest that they're against stuff. But when they're in the majority, they really we got to still keep paying for.
I'm sure I can find all the
this
times
money
that
for
Jim Banks voted with Nancy Pelosi in the House. I'm sure I could find those.
It's voting records out there. He's voted.
Well, this is from Wendy Patterson. What just passed funds the Green New Deal scam, wind and solar until 2031, codifies Obamacare for illegals. You know that they're trying to move off. No, there is absolutely no reform. This is a historical opportunity. We have the House and the Senate. We have a strong majority in the Senate. We can bypass Lisa Murkowski and Susan Collins, who are really Democrats.
Yeah, ranked choice voting in Alaska, Lisa Murkowski.
She pushed for it.
We could bypass them and have strong, meaningful conservative legislation from the U.S. Senate. But Jim Banks and Todd Young are both fighting tooth and nail to say, no, hang on a second. We like big government. We like massive spending. This is from Bob Good, former chairman of the Freedom Caucus in the House of Representatives. The big ugly bill should be defeated just because of the unconscionable continuing funding of the IRA green $1 trillion plus subsidies alone. These are Republicans. This is from Thomas Massey. The big, beautiful bill will add $20 trillion of federal debt over the next 10 years. And that's according to the authors of it. Now, you have to remember, folks, Trump said and called for the Congress to pass a balanced budget. He tweeted that out.
Yeah.
And everyone's glossing over that. He wanted a budget that was balanced. But the Republicans in Congress and the Senate are saying, no, we're not really conservative. We want massive new government debt. Remember, when Todd Young and Jim Banks were sworn in to Congress in 2017, your share of the national debt as a taxpayer was $170,000. Today, after 8 years of dealing with them, your share of the debt is now $323,000. And it's likely to be going up to over $500,000 now. And this is the sad part. This is from Thomas Massey again. He says, we are approaching $1.5 trillion just in annual interest payments on the debt we have today. This is not about the $20 trillion that they're probably going to pass through, unfortunately.
Sadly.
That's over $4,000 per citizen. Well, guess what that is per taxpayer? That's $12,000 per year per taxpayer just in the debt we have today, and they're going to increase it by $20 trillion.
Yeah.
So if you do the math on that, we're looking at almost $18,000 that every working Hoosier taxpayer is going to owe every year just on the debt that we have today. That's not anything for a future tax that they'll have to pay in addition to that. But that is to service the debt we have today. And that is why we have this massive inflation. There's no such thing as a free lunch, folks. I think these Republicans in Congress, they're behaving like 5 and 6 year olds. If you put them
That's accurate.
If you put them in a room with a big chocolate cake that's 3 layers high, don't give them any plates, no napkins, no utensils, no spoons, and leave the room, and you come back an hour later, they're all covered in chocolate. From their face, their hair,
It's a good analogy.
That is what these Republicans in Congress are. They are 5 and 6 year olds in a room with a chocolate cake. And they are sitting there just covering their face and slathering that icing all over each other, spending your money. Aiden's over here. He's losing it.
Well, I am too. That's what
But that is exactly, sadly, what our Republican Congress and Senate are.
Oh, the imagery. Oh.
But John, we're laughing, but that's an accurate description of what they're doing, and they don't.
And then they're making a mess, not just of themselves, but of our entire country. And it's sad.
Yeah, it is.
We have left our fiscal house to these 5 and 6 year olds who have no self-control on spending. It is just an orgy of government spending. Well, it gets even worse. Did you know that there are nearly 80 nominations that Trump has made for the federal courts to date?
Yeah.
Over 80 nominations waiting for the GOP Senate for confirmation. They have not confirmed one, not one single one yet. Not one.
Not one.
And we are way past 100 days into this.
And I would just ask, where is Senator Banks thumping his chest saying we need to confirm the nominees? I don't think I've seen him say anything.
Well, they can't. He only works 2.5 days a week.
That's true.
On the days they do work.
Well,
back to this bill. Can someone please explain to me why senior citizens are required to pay taxes on their Social Security benefits that they paid in for? That's something that should have been addressed in this bill, and it wasn't. Instead, you know what our GOP Congress is doing, what Aaron Houchin and Jefferson Shreve, they all voted for? They voted to expand blue state tax credits for blue state millionaires and billionaires so that they will be paying less in taxes while Hoosiers...
And we pay for it.
So that means that certified tax cheat, the current governor of Illinois, J.B. Pritzker, who took toilets out of his mansion and cheated on the property taxes...
He gets another $40,000
He gets another $40,000.
But back on Social Security, I do not think Social Security benefits should be taxed. You paid for that.
Yes.
It's the same as in your 401k. That is money you paid for and worked for. It shouldn't be something for the government to tax you on because you paid for it. Period.
Yeah.
You earned it. And instead, they're acting like your money that you paid for, you have to be taxed on it again when you receive it after you paid it in. No. Don't give Pritzker a $40,000 tax credit. What about Hoosier senior citizens?
Yeah.
Let's do something for them. It should be not taxed at all because it is something, again, Social Security is something you paid for. It is not something you should be paying to get. And that's what they're doing. It's just like Indiana property tax. It's the same deal.
Yep.
You own your home. You own your property. But the Indiana GOP thinks they have the right to tax you for it, in effect, charging you rent for what you already own. Going back to this Green New Deal scam, did you know that there is still, even after some of it was cut out, there is still over $522 billion of Green New Deal scam waste, fraud, and abuse remaining in the big, beautiful boondoggle? the quote-unquote conservatives in Washington are turning on Massey. They're saying, oh, we need to primary him. No, I'm sending him another donation because he is awesome.
Yes, we elect Massey.
Well, all Republican conservatives campaign like Thomas Massey, but they all end up voting
like Nancy Pelosi
and Lindsey Grahamnesty. It's always that.
He helps me from the left. Well, Lindsey is a
who
leftist.
Jim Banks loves to pal around with. They're very
yeah.
special friends.
And also, Lindsey Graham loves war and sending our kids to die.
Yeah.
Yeah. We have to have real conservatives, and there aren't none. There are none other than Thomas Massey and that one congressman from the 8th District in Ohio.
Warren Davidson.
Senator Ron Johnson, we're going to be watching him because he says we need to return spending to pre-pandemic levels. It's not only doable, it's essential.
Yes.
We have to get real economic conservatism back. Folks, when we come back, we'll get right back into this. This is John Rust on The John Rust Show. Welcome back, folks. This is John Rust on The John Rust Show, broadcasting on 95.9 FM and 950 AM all across central Indiana on Freedom 95. Once again in the studio here with Aiden Marietta and Justin George.
Hello.
Thank you. Great to be here.
And sometimes it takes outsiders to realize what blessings we have on Memorial Day weekend again.
Yes.
For those who fought and died for our freedoms. I'll give an example of this. Elon Musk. He immigrated here from South Africa.
That's true.
He worked his heart out helping to elect President Trump and Republican Congress and Senate. Unfortunately, the Republican Congress has completely ignored Elon Musk. They have just blown him off. They don't care.
Yeah.
They don't care about anything he's done. Republicans have not codified any of the Doge cuts. They are doing anything Elon Musk has even suggested.
And they have not codified the executive orders, particularly the one where we got to keep the men out of the women's sports. They won't even do that. They're doing fighters like Riley Gaines. They're doing her, and well, not really her, just her. They're doing all the female athletes who have suffered at those hands a complete disservice.
I think this will go down in history as one of the biggest mistakes in political history in the United States for the Republican Congress not to be codifying the Doge cuts.
I agree.
They should.
They should.
They are literally looking the gift horse in the mouth. Elon Musk has spent hundreds of millions of dollars helping them get elected, helping deliver conservative majorities for our country. But once they get into office, they have just churned their back on the taxpayers. Republican voters are very excited by Doge's work and by Elon Musk's work.
Sure.
But the House and the Senate have done zip, zilch, nada.
Nothing.
They have just, unfortunately, the Atlantic magazine, why do we keep talking about them?
Well,
they came out attacking Elon Musk. And if you remember, folks,
I would just point out, Senator Banks loves the Atlantic magazine.
Yeah,
now, he says he doesn't anymore, but in
does.
2017, as a freshman member of the House of Representatives, then Congressman Banks went to the Atlantic magazine, which is owned by Steve Jobs' widow, and he said, I want an influx of immigrants.
Well, the Republicans in Congress at the time, less than 26% supported President Trump's border wall. So the Atlantic magazine is attacking Elon Musk, which means he's been doing something very, very, very good.
Yeah.
And where has the Republicans been? Elon is a warrior for America. He understands the principles of this country and he believes in them. He's done great things. I don't believe in subsidizing electric cars, but I think you should absolutely have the right to buy one.
Yeah.
And if you want to buy one with performance, you should absolutely look at a Tesla.
The freedom to do so.
I might get a Rivian truck if I ever get the money to do that. It looks
Those
really
are
cool.
nice.
Well, the Republican members of Congress, they all wanted pictures with them. Remember, the Speaker Mike Johnson was doing the selfie thing on Air Force One, and he was looking over the shoulder and getting a picture with Elon Musk and President Trump. They all spent months taking pictures with them, but there has not been one vote on the Doge cuts.
They got their
Not
photo
one vote on the waste and fraud. Can anyone explain this to me? That's from Matt Van Swal on Twitter. Unfortunately, Elon has announced he's getting out of politics. He's realized the GOP has no interest in winning or fixing things. Now that he's now done donating money to the Republican Party because they have just sat on their tushes doing absolutely nothing. You know, it's sad that we have this country that so many died for, and our Republican Congress is squandering this massive opportunity. Again, we have the Senate, the House, and the presidency.
We have the trifecta.
We could pass what we have.
And we have enough votes in the House and the Senate to do whatever conservatives wanted to do.
Yeah.
But they're not conservative. That's why they're not doing it.
Conservative.
That's why Todd Young and Jim Banks, the two peas in a pod, Senators Tweedledee and Tweedledum,
Exactly.
they're identical,
Yes.
are doing zip, zilch, nada for Elon Musk.
And I imagine Jim Banks tried to get photos with Elon Musk.
He has a picture of himself with Mark Zuckerberg.
Well, that sums up where he stands.
That's
It
where,
does.
yeah, that's yeah.
Senator Banks loves his photo ops, that's for sure.
Yes, and that basically he loves. That's a translation for "I love censoring conservatives," which
Right.
Facebook engaged in.
Yep, they did.
Well, this is from Matt Benswell. He says, I was so excited for this administration because of the promise of Doge. But then I watched as the GOP did nothing while Elon's businesses were bombed and Teslas were vandalized. Where has the GOP Congress been on that? Zip, zilch, nada.
They've done nothing.
Not one vote. Not a darn one. Months went by. Still no votes. All we are getting is a bill, the big, beautiful boondoggle, which adds $20 trillion to our nation's debt over the next 10 years. Folks, another show comes to a close, but I want to close with my father's favorite Bible verse on this very poignant Memorial Day weekend. This is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. Count our blessings for those who have sacrificed so much to make our nation so great. This is John Russ signing off on The John Russ Show. See you all again next week on the radio.